So a very, very warm welcome to Lollys Stirk. I'm not going to say lots about what she does at the moment, but she's very well known in the world of birth. We'll understand how and why in a little bit. But I'd love to know, where are you in the world right now?
Right now, I'm in East Sussex. It's a little village called East Dean, and I've lived here. It's a cottage, yeah, a drafty cottage, lovely drafty cottage, and we've lived here for 22 years. And before that, we lived in London originally for 30 years. We lived in London, and originally I come from South Africa. I grew up in South Africa, so a village in England is very different to me, but it's lovely. It's lovely, absolutely. Been in the garden this morning, and you know, I still haven't got used to the cold, you know, having grown up in the heat, but as long as you dress properly, it's delightful. Absolutely.
I know you love your garden. What's blooming at the moment?
Gosh, lilac and all the cherry blossom and what else? Yeah, lilacs mainly, and cherry blossom. And I got this cherry blossom outside that I buried my dad's ashes under. So every year when it comes up, I think, gosh, his DNA is in every one of those blossoms. It makes it. I've also got my mother-in-law's ashes under another cherry blossom, which is a white one. My dad's is pink. So we live right next door to a cemetery, not a cemetery, a churchyard with lots of graves. You know, it's a graveyard. And my husband always says we're in competition with them. Because I've got my dad, I've got my mother-in-law, I've got 3 dogs and a cat in our garden. We've buried, obviously not the bodies of the humans, but the ashes. Yeah, so it's a lovely thing to have that.
I live on a road that leads up to a cemetery, and we always joke on our road that people only make one more move after they live in this road, which is to the end.
The end of the road. Oh, absolutely.
Because it's a very nice road to live in.
Yeah. But, well, gosh, the churches are usually placed in a beautiful place quite often. Yeah.
But let's go back. I'd love to know what you were like as a girl. So thinking about 10 years old or so.
Well, as I said to you, I grew up in South Africa, which was pretty, you know, in the 50s. So I grew up in South Africa in the 50s, which was pretty extraordinary. On the one hand, it was wonderful. It was Johannesburg that I grew up in, and it was incredibly, it was wild. And I was wild. I would have been considered a tomboy. I was definitely a tomboy. I wanted to be friends with the boys, not so much with the girls. And I was always climbing trees, always had bare feet, and driving go-karts in the street. And my mother used to, she was always screaming out the window to come inside. But it was an amazing place to grow up on the one hand. But of course, on the other hand, there was apartheid, which was the extraordinary law that came in, I think, 1948. I was born in 1949. So as I was growing up, it hadn't yet quite kicked in how awful it was that people were expected to be separate because of the color of their skin. And there were some people who just accepted it and didn't even notice it, to be honest, just accepted it as it was. And me, being who I am, I just never could deal with the injustices that I saw every day. So I think that had a lot to do with my character and how I grew up, was just seeing this injustice every day, and also being free to roam and being wild. So it was a great place to grow up, apart from, you know, the awful situation. But it was very, you know, bipolar, let's put it that way. Yeah.
And how was it with sort of schooling? Did you go to local school, or because I was born in Kenya and lived in Malawi for a while, and a lot of my friends would be sent off to boarding school, but I always stayed with my parents, and my mum taught me.
Yeah. Oh, really? Well, yeah, well, I went to a local school down the hill, used to walk there every day with my little blue uniform on, and walk back up the hill home, and had loads of friends who lived in the neighborhood. We were immigrants. Well, my mum and dad had immigrated to South Africa after the war. They were Glaswegians, Scots. And my dad got a job in South Africa, and not long before he left, he met my mum, and they fell in love, and he was leaving in 2 weeks. So 2 weeks, they courted for 2 weeks, and when he was leaving, he said, how about it? And she followed him, I think about 6 months later. And that's how I came along. That was 47 they got to South Africa. Well, she joined him, they got married. And then I was born 2 years later in Johannesburg, yeah. So we were all immigrants. We were in the street where I lived, there were Portuguese and Italians and Scottish, all races were living together, and it was really colourful. It was amazing, all the languages, and it was great fun, and people would have communal barbecues, and everybody would be talking in their own languages and exchanging. So I was a tomboy, basically. I was wild, too wild for my mother's life.
And so were you an adult when you then moved to London?
Yeah, I was 19. I was 19 when I moved to London. I'd got very involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And at some stage, there was a lot going on. And I realized that if I'd carried on, I was going to have my passport taken away from me. And I wanted to travel. So quite selfishly, and being 19 years old, I decided rather to have travel around the world. And I didn't get very far, but I got to London and then traveled, to and from there. But London immediately became my base. And it was 1969 when I arrived. So it was really extraordinary compared to where I had grown up. Apart from all the physical freedom, the feeling of freedom in the streets in London in 1969 was unbelievable. It was fun, it was music, it was Park Carnaby Street, it was the King's Road, it was fabulous, and the Beatles were just splitting up, and it was rock and roll. It was wonderful, yeah. And well, from there, do you want me to go on?
Yeah, because I know you from your work in sort of pregnancy yoga, active birth, but I know that you sort of had something before that.
Yeah. I started as soon as I arrived. I got in South Africa. I'd always worked in restaurants. I mean, I'd done a secretarial course, which all teenagers, if you didn't go to university, which I really wanted to, but it was going to be too difficult because my mum wouldn't let me go to university unless I stayed at home, and I knew I couldn't live at home. So I did a secretarial course, which I hardly ever used after that, but that was all right.
What would you have studied if you had gone to university?
I wanted to be a vet. I probably couldn't have hacked it because, becoming a vet is really, it takes a lot of brain power. I had got a university pass, but I've always loved animals and had animals and just wanted to do that. But I didn't want to have to stay at home for all those years and study. So I came to London and immediately got drawn into this world of, what was happening in London was very much the first wave of yoga was happening, not the first, but really the first noticeable wave of yoga was happening. And I was au pairing for a family that were very involved in psychotherapy, in art, it was really interesting. And I got very involved in, psychotherapy, acting, and started to, some very eminent psychotherapists that we knew, R.D. Lang, told us about yoga. And we all started doing yoga, this group that I lived with, like we were like a commune almost. And we started going for yoga classes with someone, a really good teacher, who was Iyengar, BKS Iyengar's right-hand woman. Her name was Donna Holloman. She still is Donna Holloman. She's still teaching in Italy, I think. She's got more into horses these days. And I started training in the yoga. That was my beginning in 1969 to really, it was very, very strict military. We were up at dawn. We were holding positions for 25 minutes, you know, back bends 80, one after another. It was an extraordinary, you know, rigorous kind of training, but it was something that I was fascinated by. And I was lucky because I was a very bendy person, and lucky I wasn't very disciplined. So if I had really forced myself to do, I would have been a cripple by now, because we were overdoing the bendy bits. We were overdoing the, you know, there was not such of a balance of, and if you were bendy, you could really, you know, you could show off. And luckily I was a bit lazy, so I didn't overdo it, which luckily I kept to the core stuff, and loved every minute of it, kept it on going. And of course, along with that, we got into vegetarianism, because that goes hand in hand with yoga. And there were but very, very few vegetarian restaurants in London at the time, very few indeed, extraordinary. So me and my girlfriends, there were three of us, we opened a vegetarian restaurant, and it was in St. John's Wood. We found a shop and we bought a hotel in Bayswater was closing down, so we bought all of their equipment, took it, you know, somehow, I don't know how we managed. We each put in £500 to open this restaurant, which was an enormous amount of money. And we opened this restaurant, and it was an extraordinary place. It was wonderful. I had, previous to that, I'd been working in a vegetarian restaurant, which still is open today, called Manor in Primrose Hill, to learn about you know, vegetarian food, because I'd always been in restaurants, but not vegetarian ones. And so we learned about vegetarianism, and we had Japanese cooks and all sorts of, we could feed, we had sushi, vegetarian sushi, we had macrobiotic food, we had all tempura, you name it, we had it. It was vegan, and it was just down the road from the Abbey Road studios, which was, you know, full of musicians, and they would all come. So it was a real happening. It was a wonderful place to be. It was hard work.
Yeah, I imagine.
As all restaurants are, but we'd get in our little van, 5 o'clock in the morning. We'd go to Covent Garden, which was still a vegetable market, not what it is now, and get all our vegetables and drive back and cook. And it was really good fun. And we had extraordinary clientele, you know, it was all the artists and the psychotherapists and all of that kind of thing. And that lasted for about, well, in my case, it lasted about 4 years. I worked there, and then I fell pregnant with my daughter, so that took me on another path.
Yeah, and so that sounds like that was when you really shifted gears into, well, you can say it in your own words, but sort of moving away from that very disciplined, very strict kind of yoga into something quite different.
Yeah, it sort of happens that there weren't that many teachers, but a lot of the teachers were women, and a lot of them had a softer approach, still quite strict, but lots of teachers. I learned from Angela Farmer, who's still around now teaching, wonderful teacher, and Mary Stewart, who was one of my teachers. So there was this move away from the sort of masculine military way of working, but still all very Iyengar based, and just softening it. We were softening it, and then I became pregnant, and you know, I sort of adapted the Iyengar square shaped, you know, holding postures, rigid kind of work into pregnancy yoga at the time, and it was okay. I always think it was a bit clunky. It was a bit like, you know, fitting a round peg into a square hole, you know, it just because all these soft bodies, because I had started teaching yoga, and you know, pregnant women were starting to come to my classes. In, you know, even when I was pregnant, I had a few pregnant women in my classes, and it always seemed wrong to see a, you know, a pregnant woman doing this very stiff stuff. So we'd soften it up. But it wasn't really until I met Vanda Scaravelli and Sandra Sabatini and drew on that very different way of working from the inside out, working with the breath. And because when we were doing the Iyengar stuff, it was all, you know, you did your postures and then you did the pranayama afterwards. It was
quite separate.
Yeah. Whereas when it came to working this way, you were breathing the whole way through. And that really, I resisted it for a while because I had really invested in my Iyengar training, but it just seemed to be so right. The more I did it, the better it became. And there was no forcing, there was no, it wasn't, I think what happened was that it was thought of as a kind of lazy kind of yoga for a lot of the time, but if you're working at it, it's definitely not at all, you know, it really isn't. You're working, but from the inside out, and that's not as easy to see. It's when you're using, you know, the big muscles of the body instantly, you know. So yeah, that was
yeah, you're making me think how it's, I think that happens a lot, that we start to identify with a particular school of yoga. We sort of think that's our gang, whether it's Ashtanga, Iyengar, and then, you know, as our life changes, whether it's through pregnancy or maybe for some people illness, or it might be other reasons, and we need to find a different way of being in our bodies and moving our bodies. It can be quite a wrench almost to move away from that identity.
Absolutely, especially you get attached to it, you get but also getting older. I mean, you know, getting older is something you want to continue doing yoga, but there's no way I want to do that strenuous stuff. I don't, obviously we haven't even considered it, but the working strongly with the body, I just, you know, it's not for me anymore. I enjoyed it while I did it. Yeah.
And your passion for birth, you know, continues, doesn't it? I mean, that's been quite a long running passion of yours.
Yes, it was. I mean, it was funny because I kind of resisted teaching pregnancy yoga, but it just kept on happening. No one was teaching just pregnancy yoga in 1970, the end of the 70s, say. And I started taking pregnant women into my classes, but for me to teach to a general class and a pregnant woman, I was somehow always much more interested in the pregnant woman, or I wanted to look after her more. And I find it very difficult to do both. So I thought, well, let's just do pregnancy classes. And people came flocking, women came flocking. It was like, you know, I was doing it in my front room, in my house, in my flat in Maida Vale. And I just couldn't stop this flood of women coming in. And I kept on thinking, well, is this really what I want to do? But they wouldn't let me stop. And then, of course, from my pregnancy classes, they go, you're just going to leave us now? So we started teaching postnatal class. I started teaching postnatal classes, getting specific about drawing back and getting back to strength, that kind of core work, bringing that in more. And of course, then the babies, and Peter Walker was part of my social group, and we started doing baby massage. He started doing baby massage. So he'd do baby massage, then I teach the postnatal yoga. And it was just a scene. It was just an incredible scene. It was such good fun. And it just grew and grew and grew. And I just continued doing it. And of course, when you're sort of working with pregnant women, they want to know about birth. And when I'd had my daughter, I was thinking about it when I was thinking about talking to you, that it's very much, when I gave birth in 1974, it's very much like that now. Birth is in a real state, you know, birth is really struggling, and I'm hoping that the swing to something better comes, because it certainly did then. That why I didn't give birth in hospital in those days was that it was very controlled. It was called the active management of labor, and you were controlled. It was conveyor belt. Your were induced the day after your due date. You were put on a drip if you didn't labor fast enough. You were meant to give birth within 12 hours. It was episiotomies were like left, right, and center, and you weren't allowed off the bed, and you were, you know, you were really, it was a totally controlled thing. And that's why I didn't give birth in hospital, because it scared me more than giving birth. So I gave birth at home. And that, one of your questions was, what was, you know, one of the turning points in your life? And giving birth to my daughter was obviously one of the, well, it was a real eye-opener. That's something that I had been so terrified of really all my life. You know, in South Africa, it was like, apart from one part of the population who just seemed to get on with it, the other part of the population were terrified of it. And I'd grown up just thinking, oh, it's an awful thing when you know, all your mothers would sort of whisper about it. And when I did it at home, and I had a midwife that I'd hired, and my partner John was with me, and 2 cats and my best girlfriend, and we had I mean, it wasn't an easy birth. She was posterior, so it went on, and it was really I had a real backache, but we managed. And after she was born, it was like eureka! Wow, I did that, and that's what propelled me into the work that I do, because I thought, if I was so scared, and I wasn't such a, you know, I wasn't such a physical candidate. I've got very narrow hips, and I managed, you know, with that little bit of yoga that I had done, because I'd been doing about 4 years of training, but particularly through the breathing. I had worked with the breath, and in my labor, if it hadn't been for this breath guiding me and keeping me going, and you know, it was like this mast of the ship. I kept on thinking there's something guiding me, and my team around me, obviously. That really made me want to learn more. So therefore I went into educating myself about childbirth, you know, and in the 70s, 80s, there were so many childbirth gurus. There was, you know, Sheila Kitzinger, who wrote all the books, and was incredibly such a powerful force in changing the way birth was. She was so into home birth and natural birth. And there was Michel Audin, who brought really, he had a unit in France where women just started, well, going into water because they wanted to, and he designed water pools, so he really brought water birth into the picture. He was around, and I studied with him. I went to births with him, which was so amazing as a doula, because I thought I couldn't teach about giving birth unless I'd been to them. So I became a doula just by going to births, not by doing any course. There wasn't a course. And I just went to births and births and births and births, and you know, and studied and all of that. And then there was Janet Velasquez, who was my in my social group, and she was an NCT teacher, and I did my NCT training with her, and you know, we crossed over. She was into the childbirth education, I brought the yoga, and for many years she and I trained teachers. You know, for about 15 years we trained what we called active birth teachers, which was a combination of, you know, like childbirth education and yoga, the physical and the intellectual. So we got that mix going well, and it was wonderful. We trained scores of women during those times, and I'm still very much in touch with them, obviously.
Yeah, and it's always struck me, it's such an honor to be with somebody while they're giving birth. It's such a very particular atmosphere that can develop. And thinking about your own experience and talking a bit more about that transformational moment, sort of how did you feel after it? What was it that transformed during that birth, when you realized that you were able to do it in your own home?
It's almost it's almost indescribable in a way, because it was just like I had done something so extraordinary well. I had done something, it was such hard work, and at times I thought, I can't do this, and I've always been a bit of a wimp, to be honest. That was something that I was never, I was always a bit of a, never very brave with things. And it brought out my courage. It brought out the emotions that were released during it. And being with a good friend, during the labor, her and I sat and talked about our childhood, because I grew up with her. And I had the most extraordinary memories. It was almost like my brain was being opened to remember things. And, in between surges, just talking to her. And just the midwife, who was so hands off, she sat with a meditation stick. She just leaned forward on a meditation stick. She was sitting cross-legged in the corner. And I thought, why isn't she doing something? And then eventually I just thought, well, if she's relaxed, everything must be okay. So by doing her meditation, so it was just an extraordinary, mind-blowing thing that I had dreaded, and it was just hard to describe. But I really walked through a door that had been closed to me since then. It really changed my and it triggered this wanting to pass that on, because it's not, I don't think everybody's going to have such an extraordinary time of it, but within whatever hand they've been dealt, 2% of women in the world need to have a cesarean section, or those babies won't be there. So when I'm teaching, it's not that I'm saying you've got to do it this way, but whatever you have to deal with, that you feel great about your choices and about what you've surrounded yourself by, and that you shouldn't come out, unfortunately, as many are traumatized by it. And that's what I wanted, and that's what I've been teaching ever since, to try and get people to really make choices and really feel that, no, it's not necessarily going to be the baby diving out into the water pool or whatever, it might not be that, but whatever it is, you're going to do your best and feel good about it. So that's what I've been trying to, since that day, wanted to pass on.
I think it's so important to let people know what all the possibilities are, and let them know that it is possible to maybe have a home birth, like you say, putting the right team into place. And and I wanted to share with you, it just came into my mind a few years ago. I was at a yoga camp one August, and it takes place in a field overlooking Glastonbury. And there was a lady there who was due, and her independent midwife was on the field also in a camper van. And she went into labour during the camp. It was actually in the evening, and there was kirtan, all this beautiful music and singing going on, and she was in a tent next to all of that happening, and people were running backwards and forwards getting saucepans of hot water for the birth pool that she'd taken to the camp.
Right. Now we know what the hot water's for.
And the baby was born during the night. And the really special thing was that every morning there's always a fire, and every morning you meet as a community and you go around and say everybody's name, welcoming everybody that's there. And at the end of the meeting, the father came with this new little baby and introduced the baby. Wow. Oh, it's giving me goosebumps just talking about it. It was such a gift to every single person that was there. Just that mum's faith that it was going to be okay, and that's where she felt most comfortable, being surrounded by these people and
absolutely.
all that love. And
what a gift she gave to all those people there, all the women there. We just need more of that. We need more of that, that young women feel that it's possible, within all the stuff that we've got to deal with, that it's possible. It is possible. And the fact that there are now birth centers in hospital is great. It's wonderful that we've got them, but they weren't there when I gave birth, 70s, and now we've got home from home. But it would be so wonderful if more people, and actually my colleagues are reporting, and I'm also picking up, that more and more people now, because of the state of what's going on in hospitals, that more people are opting for home births. If the midwives, could be more supported to do more home births, it's a really good time for getting home births going, because
yeah, I mean, certainly
to a lot of things.
Yeah,
if the woman's well, she's near a hospital. Whoops. Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, I mean, certainly over the pandemic, I've had more people in my classes than ever before opting for a home birth.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah.
But I've got one more question for you, which is about how cycles affect your work or life. And they can be any kind of cycles. It might be circadian rhythm, it might be looking back at menstrual cycles, or whatever kind of cycle.
Whatever kind of cycle. Well, I definitely am affected by the moon. I do know that. And when I had periods, which are long gone, I would really quite regularly have a period with a full moon. And if ever my partner, my husband and I are arguing, I always look out the window, and it's very often a full moon that we're arguing on. So moons have been very much part of it. I can't sleep, so the moon has been very much part of a big cycle. And I mean, my menstrual cycle was interesting, because there's so much going on about menopause nowadays, thank goodness, and it's wonderful, and all these books to encourage young women who are having their periods to be proud and be amazed how our bodies do this thing. And I was thinking, when I was thinking about talking to you today, that when I first got my period, I was 12, I knew nothing about it, and I ran out to my mother and I went, I've got bleeding piles. And I don't know how I knew about bleeding piles more than that, but I had no idea. So at 12 years old, I knew nothing. So that was an extraordinary thing. And, then just got onto that cycle, and I was quite regularly every 28 days. And then when my periods left, it was such a relief as well, because, suddenly from going, I'd go up and down during a month. You get to the point where you're about to have your period and you're feeling your breasts and you feel a bit tired or whatever, which was lovely, because as soon as you have the period, you feel reborn, and that's lovely. And then you go through the whole cycle again. But it was such a lovely thing after menopause, which I didn't feel too badly about it. It didn't seem to knock me too sideways. Was this wonderful even energy that I didn't have to go up and down during a month. And it was such a wonderful thing to just be, the energy was even, far more even than I'd even plan things with a period. I wouldn't do that because I knew I'd be just about to have a period. And I was like, oh, I won't do it then, and then I could just sort of have this even energy. And it was another phase, obviously.
Yeah, so a freedom with that, I guess.
There was a real freedom, absolutely, and a relief. It was a relief. So I was a bit sad, but not that sad, to be honest. Yeah, it was just another phase to go through. Absolutely.
And I was just wondering, how did your mum receive you when you ran out and you were shouting out about
pure embarrassment. And when she told me, and oh, my poor mother, she I was so embarrassed about everything. And I was like shocked that, you know, and I said, please don't tell anyone, please don't tell anyone. I said to my mum, and then I said, especially Dad, don't tell Dad. And of course, sitting at dinner that night, my dad looked at me and he went, congratulations. I went, oh, I wanted to die. So it was awkward, let's put it that way. It was, nobody gave me a fabulous book to read or a, you know, and I love these books that are coming out now, and just all this encouragement from mums like yourself, because you've got younger, you've got,
yes, yeah, I've got 2 girls, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's so nice. It's so, there is such, some things have really changed for the better, but birth does seem to be it keeps being drawn back into the Middle Ages. I mean, you know, been campaigning for since the 70s. We've been campaigning, and it has to come from the women. It has to come from the women themselves. There's, you know, we can do whatever we do. We can train them, we can encourage them, we can get them talking to each other, all the work that we do in our classes, but they have to take up the mantle. I was forced into it, and I was so pleased that I did. So perhaps the way things are going at the moment will encourage more women to take that chance and have their babies at home, because when you talk about home birth in a class, it's like you can see them go, oh yeah, but that's not me, or oh, you're so brave, and all of that stuff that people say to other women, but it's just not brave at all. You know, it's very sensible if you're being sensible about it.
Yeah, I really I think you're right, and I think the more that people can share their experiences and understand that they, you know, maybe unfortunately have had a bad experience, you know, and talk about maybe why that came about, and a critical mass of people realizing that there could be a different way of doing this.
Absolutely. In my classes, that's what online, I've been doing online since the beginning of COVID. I have had so many, I mean, at least once a month, or sometimes twice a month, have someone coming back online to tell their birth story, which I couldn't do as much in real life. And that's where the real information hits home, because I can be the expert and telling them about how their pelvis is fabulous, and, you know, gravity and all of the stuff that we talk about. But when someone comes along and talks, a woman who has just had a baby with her partner, and there's the baby often on the breast, talks about it, it's a different kind of hearing. It goes straight in, and they go, right. And so many minds have been changed by these women coming back. And that's what I've loved about online, teaching online, that, you know, that kind of horse's mouth information is being passed on beautifully.
Well, I've loved talking to you. I could talk to you for a very long time. Where can people find you?
I actually am only working, I'm sort of taking it easy at the moment, but I only work through Tri Yoga at the moment, and I teach a pregnancy yoga class on a Wednesday evening through Tri Yoga from 7 till 8:30. The first half an hour is talking or hearing about a birth. I've just stopped a postnatal class on a Saturday. It worked fantastically during a lockdown, but it changed, so I'm going to find another date, so I will probably do another postnatal. And I do a birth preparation workshop once a month through Tri Yoga from 9 till 1 on a Sunday morning, and that should be taken a month to 6 weeks before your due date, and it's a hypnobirthing meets active birth. I use everything that I've learned, pass it on in that 4 hours.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Sam.
I love that, you know, through your life, you know, wherever you've been doing, whether it's the restaurant or the yoga, it's about nourishing people, it seems.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking me. Lovely to meet you and see you. I'll see you in the flesh one day, I hope.
Yes, very much hope so.
Thank you.